Hey guys, welcome back to the Performance Playbook podcast. Today, I've got the one and only Matt Chapman. Matt, how you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. This is awesome.
So I've been super excited. I've been kind of like pausing, waiting to get you onto the podcast. One big piece of this for me was I've really been working my way into climbing. Obviously, I've had to be
hmm
like very slow about it because I'm also an athlete at the same time right now too. So I get to climb as of recently like once or twice a month if I'm lucky.
Okay.
But I had a little bit of climbing volume before I stopped, and so I think the big part that I wanted to pull you on because you post so much educational stuff was little tidbits that I feel like people might be missing. But can you give the viewership who you are and why should we know you and give us the spiel.
I don't know if I have a spiel prepared. I'm a performance climbing coach, so my passion is education. Like foremost, that's really what I feel I'm good at and what I want to spend my time doing. So education is the baseline, and then on top of education, I get to do things that I'm really passionate about. So climbing is my number one passion, and helping athletes get from point A to point B. Doesn't matter how far the gap is between those two. Point A to point B could be just getting a little bit stronger. It could be a beginner learning how to, you know, properly fit the right shoes, or it could be, which is more my field, helping youth athletes go pro. That's really what I'm good at. It's the avenue I know. And so I dedicate an obscene amount of time to developing athletes.
Ah, that's beautiful. Yeah, because
Yeah.
again, with all the content that you post, I feel like everything that I'm watching, I'm just I'm like, this guy's giving me too much information. Like I'm just like spoon
Yeah.
feeding all of this stuff. What do you think is like if you were to just walk into a random gym, just
Mhm.
watching people climb, what do you think is like the biggest, like not necessarily a red flag, but you're like, yo, they're missing this. And there's like a few keys that most climbers are just kind of missing from maybe their training that would take them another V grade or two up.
So are you talking about like recreational climbers?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it depends on a few things. It depends on, like, there's generalizations when you're talking about that. So there's
Yeah.
generalizing the way, like recreational or beginner guys tend to climb a certain way. Uh, Girls tend to climb a certain way. Women tend, you know,
Yeah.
technique is a massive thing, like basic techniques, would be, would be first. I don't know if it would be in order, but it would be a major thing that's missing. If I just look at when I walk into a gym, as you said, and I look at recreational climbers, technique is missing. They just don't have the knowledge. There's not knowledge gaps. There's multiple knowledge gaps. Um, the things that they do know, like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, they're not connected. So they're not using the pieces of information that they do know in combination. So there's
Mm,
gaps there as well. Then I would say strength, but again, not in order. Strength might be the first thing. So a lot of guys come into the gym and they've got background in various sports, so they've got weightlifting and things like that, and so they're mostly pulling. They're mostly using their upper body to pull, to the neglect of proper footwork, balance, things like that. So they're very loud on the wall.
yeah.
They're banging, their feet are banging against the wall. Women, again, generally speaking, and I say this as a high performance coach of mostly females on my team, and they're all stronger than every guy I know. But generally speaking, to the recreational climber, women are not using their upper body strength, the same. They are relying more on footwork, and learning out of necessity. They're learning what it is to feel balanced on the wall, to push with their legs. So they're actually learning the correct way. I tend to find that men, when they learn the sport, they take off very quickly, because they're just pulling, and then they plateau once the climbing gets technical. V4, V5, they start to just plateau. They just can't do it. Women tend to progress slower, but when they get to the V4, V5 level, they're killing it. Just
Yeah.
because they're building strength slowly, but they've got the technique and the baseline. So I would say, actually, I polled this a number of, I don't know, months ago on my Instagram. I said if you could push a magic button and be instantaneously 4 times stronger than you are, or instantaneously, you know, have world-class technique, which would you pick? And a lot of people obviously said strength, and a lot of people also answered correctly and said technique. And the reason that's correct is because strength is six. I mean, you know, as an athlete, strength is 6 months of focused strength training with a good coach, and you can,
Yep.
depending on your physiology, you can double your strength. I mean, it depends on your stage of development, but good technique, like world-class technique, that's at least a decade, at least. So the correct answer is, of course, you'd push the button and gain the technique. So I'd say that's probably
Yeah,
what's missing the most.
that it's such interesting insight to me, just because like I feel like I'm gonna I say this in a couple of podcasts, but like I am a movement practitioner. That's what I like to think
Yeah,
about. Like I just
yeah,
love different sports. I like movement. I like strength training, and so um, that was my exact analysis. Was the same as what you just said.
hmm
When I walked into the gym, and this was kind of my own experience, I would excel substantially faster than a woman climbing next to me because I would just use my brute strength. But what I
yeah,
did notice is I capped out and got screwed. And
yes,
like as they got to that same level, they just kept getting better and better and better and better, and they
yes,
blew me out of the. They blew me. Not even
yes.
like it wasn't like kind of. They blew me out of the water.
No, 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 it's not
And
even close.
yeah, and it's just so funny because like I think maybe that's why I loved climbing so much is because no one gets pushed away like football, right? Like American football. Like it's just hard to play the same game, and it's just not that fair. But you bring men and women into this sport, and it's so cool to see the strengths change but play into people. And so like I love being able to climb with my sister who got me into climbing, and I learned so much from her because she's so perfectly technical. And so I
Yeah,
would climb with her, and she would poke at me all the time. She would poke at me. Hey, try this. Hey, try this. You're being too, like, the acrobatics is cool, and trying to dyno everything's cool, but there's a time for it, and you
that's
can't
right.
just do it on any route. And
Yeah.
so I think that is my favorite part, to be honest. And it's funny that you say you have more women that you're coaching. I would prefer to watch women climbing. And I noticed that I gravitated when I was watching the pro competitions. It's just like some of the moves that I see, I'm just like I don't really understand. Like the men are really incredible with some of the lock off strength and some of these big
hmm
moves, but it's cool. But I watch the women and I'm blown away by the things that they're able to like maneuver into. And I think one big piece that I'm obsessed with is the hypermobility that you're able to utilize. And I think that was one of the pieces I wanted to tap into was especially with like your daughter that's a pro and you've been coaching her for so long. Um, did you get the sport specific mobility by doing the sport, or was there specific drills that you've really been implementing for her for a consistent amount of time that helped her do more of these mobility-esque moves on the wall?
So it's interesting. It's a good question. It's interesting that the go-to thing when people see a strong climber, male or female, the go-to thing is like, "Wow, it's so strong." So they'll see Indiana, especially growing up when she was a kid. They say, she'll win a national title, and like, "Man, your daughter, she's so strong." That's the go-to, right? That's what people say because they don't have vocabulary to say anything else. The reality is, compared to a lot of the other females in her category, for just like strength wise, she was middle of the pack. Um, at first, she was actually lower middle of the pack. She would have been in the lower percentile for strength. And I recognized that right away, not having much climbing coaching experience at the time. But what I do well, and what I've always done well, is problem solving and thinking very clearly. I guess with a passion for pedagogy, the art of teaching. I really like the more complex the problem, the better. So it allows me to start at the end. What do I want? What do I want to achieve? And now let's work backwards and reverse engineer the problem and figure out how to go forward. So when I realized that Indy wasn't strong, Without knowing much climbing technique, I thought that's what we need to do. We need to solve the technical approach to the point where it is miles ahead. We need to compensate for the strength. While building strength slowly, we need to compensate by putting extra time on flagging drills and on balance on the wall and footwork and coordination and understanding how to coordinate movement. So I'm not even talking about coordination boulders like in the modern sense where they're flying and campusing over boulders. I'm talking about just learning how to pull and push at the same time. This is often a mistake I see, again, to bring back to your question about recreational climbers, is they'll do a movement, and if you video it and slow it down, you'll actually see them engage with their arms and then push with their feet. But because they're uncoordinated, those two things aren't working in tangent, their power is low, and they're like, oh, I'm not a powerful climber. Well, that's not that all the case. Actually, most people have way more power than they think they do. They're just not coordinated. So that's what I mean even by technique. Technique's not just, inside flags and, drop knees. Technique is learning how to use the body to maximize what it's capable of doing through cooperative efforts, coordinating your hands, your feet, your core, timing. All of this comes. I mean, now that I'm at the level where high performance coaching is about the minutia, it's about the smallest details. Now I have much more of a vocabulary, but at the time, I was just trying to figure it out. I was like, hey, why did you fall? And that's kind of what I stumbled upon very early, is that question. And she didn't have an answer and I didn't have an answer. But we would look at it and we'd say, okay, why did you fall? Well, you swung off, your left hip swung off because of A, B, and C. Let's reverse engineer that. What can we do to fix it? And through just decades of doing that, I'm now an expert in climbing movement. But it was a lot of time spent obsessing over what you said, movement, body movement on the wall. And to recognize also that the human body is this really complex machine that its number one skill, the number one ability of the human body is its ability to adapt. It can adapt to anything, and be okay. Like the body, we can undergo tremendous amounts of pressures and difficulties and still adapt, and so with that in mind, I just thought let's really adapt to climbing apparatus. You've got these problems on the wall. I love that they're called problems because we get to solve them, and let's just adapt to each one. And so I think that was my main approach. And then also we were doing our push-ups and chin-ups and all that. But
yeah. So I think that's the interesting part too, right? Like now you are in the realm of high performance. And so for diving, for example, right, we have the strength training, we have the in-water training, and then you have the little pieces that you always have to be like poking at. And so like mobility is huge, and it's like technique's good and all of these other pieces. Do you find that, like, for example, like I find utility in teaching someone how to do a front split because it helps us compress into a smaller position while we're flipping. Do you find any specific things like a middle split or, even just working certain stretches that would really benefit them on the wall and working through problems?
So I have this common reoccurrence, and again, it's a generalization, but especially with guys, is I'll say, listen, they'll be asking me to help them, whatever, break through a plateau or whatever. And one of the things we inevitably end up looking at is flexibility or mobility. They're not interchangeable, but just helping them understand that there's flexibility, there's mobility. But even those two are not as significant as people think, because I'll have guys say to me, or athletes say to me, I'm flexible. I've got that. And so I'll say, okay, let's test it. And I'll put them in a situation on a boulder. I'll set a boulder where they are under tension. So maybe like a double mantle where they have both arms and they have to high step one of the sides. Suddenly their flexibility, their so-called flexibility, is rendered completely pointless. It just doesn't work. And they're like, why doesn't that work? Because if I just stand on the floor, I can put my foot over my head. But when I am when my body is under tension, I lose that flexibility. And then there we go. That's mobility. The ability to flexibility is lifting your foot and holding it above your head. Mobility is lifting it up there without aid.
Yeah.
And so that's where we go back and say, okay, this is the key thing. Is mobility in the hips, is the ability to get those hip flexors loose and strong at the same time and move your legs from the hip joint. So when you ask like if there's a singular thing that is mandatory, I would say that. So splits are part of it, but also just hip flexor drills, high stepping drills under tension, not just on the floor, but under tension. And there's all sorts of drills for how to build that. But I'd say
Yeah.
that's easily the number one thing.
Yeah, because it's just so it's interesting for me because again, thankfully because I've been in diving for so long, the mobility part was something I already had. And so when I
Yeah,
walked into a gym and I watched people kind of struggle to get their leg up, I'm like, huh. And I start watching even like really good climbers that have been climbing for a long time, but they're in a certain position and they're clogged up. And I'm like, oh, like all you need, yeah, they're like clogged like really deeply, like all of those like muscles and tendons you just right around that hip because it is the hip is just it's so crucial I feel like for climbing. um I just actually made a how to front split video, just walking people through a lot of little
good.
pieces on how you could lean your way to that. And the next one I was going to do was, how to middle split. And it's so important because like I guess the reason why I was asking is because I see it so frequently to where you have so many moves where you need to step up that leg really far out or far up.
Yeah,
And it's just being able to, and the far up one I feel like is just kind of it's used all the time. And I feel like a lot of the competitions I'm watching, especially on slab, which terrifies me, is some of the most delicate, messed up, like high step on a little chip that your whole life is just sitting on. Um, Now with the whole mobility piece, do you feel like putting your athletes through a strength training program aids within that, or how do you mold your mobility and strength training for each athlete? I know that's very individualized, but for the ones that you can have your hands on in person, what does that look like?
yeah. I got a bunch of things in my mind now, so I may have to ask you to remind me of something. But let me just
Sure,
first say
sure.
you're using great vocabulary. So I love the idea of being clogged up. Actually, I'm gonna take that from you.
Yes.
That's a great way to describe how people get themselves into situations where they're just stuck. Um, and the number one way out of that clog is mobility, hip mobility in particular. Um, so great use of that. Also, your way of describing slab where it's delicate, but your life hangs in the balance. Like obviously you're not falling to your death, but like it feels like you are. This is
Yeah.
precisely how you should be training and climbing slab.
Mm.
I continue to see gyms, and I guess they have to because it's commercial, but they keep putting these big holds on slab walls, and I'm like, guys, you're ruining a slab wall. It should have nothing that sticks out more than 5 millimeters on the wall. Um,
Just a tiny
like
little
we're talking,
piece.
yes, that's the whole point of slab is suck your face into the wall and just hope, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're a setter at a gym and you're listening to this, stop putting big holds on slab walls. Um, so yeah, I think your use of vocabulary is excellent. So I have I could like probably fill your podcast with just stories about how I train my athletes when it comes to issues like that. But one of the things that I could probably give as an example is we don't do any stretching as a team. We used to, and I stopped doing that because I felt like it was a waste of training. Um, my part of my philosophy, and I think it's just a residual effect of being a coach and a dad at the same time. I was raising Indiana with this mindset that we're 24-hour athletes, which means it doesn't end when you're done at the gym. You go home and you study video and you stretch and you wake up and you do yoga and you do handstands and then you get your homework done for school, and then it's right back to studying climbing. And it sounds I don't know if that sounds like bad parenting or whatever, but I'm a big believer that you ask an athlete what they want. And if they think really hard about that and they honestly say to you, I want to go pro, like my daughter did, then my responsibility is to not disillusion them with half-assed training or a half-assed approach or a 3 hours a week or 9 hours a week or 12 hours a week. It's to say, okay, I need you to understand that what that means, what you're asking for, is an approach that is completely immersive, which means we pull you out of school. You are now going to be homeschooled. You are going to lose that social connection with friends at school. You're going to have it through climbing. It means doing this and this and this and this 3 times a day. It means, and she was like, let's go. And so, that's my approach. So what that means in terms of your question is when we're at the gym, I'm training you on the essential things that I can help you with. YouTube can help you with stretching. The only thing I'm going to do as a coach is I'm going to tell you that you have until September to be able to do the splits. And that's not a joke. I had an athlete join me 1 year in December. He joined halfway through the season. A talented climber, extremely strong, but he was so inflexible. And I said to him, listen, I know it sounds like I'm joking. I can tell you that I'm not. You have until September to do the splits or you're off the team. And guess what he could do by September? The full middle splits. I have photos of it, right? So that kind of athlete and I get along very, very well. I'm dead serious about this. And if you're dead serious about this and you do what I ask you to do, I can promise you that you will do well. But if you don't do it, if you don't do the work, there's no magic potion. So my strength training is mostly on the wall training, sport specific training, a lot of climbing, a lot of feedback, a lot of me yelling at my athletes, a lot of me maintaining a standard of excellence. And also there's laughter and love, but when we're there to work mostly. And then I remind them, usually in climbing, they'll be doing a move and suddenly they can't perform something because of lack of hip mobility. They will hear from me that they're not doing the work at home. It'll be a very kind and stern reminder that they need to come to next practice more flexible and more mobile than they are.
Yeah, I love that, and there's so much truth to it. I think you bring up a reality is people will come into a sport wanting specific things, and so like for example, I came into diving and I wanted to become an Olympian, and over time I got to really learn what that looks like. Especially, and I tell a lot of people this, and people kind of get upset with me when I say this because I've made it to that point, but I'm not that talented. And I say it all the time. I'm not that talented, but what I had to do, and that helped me because I wasn't as talented, I had to work a hell of a lot harder than most people. So when it does come to, go home, watch a lot of videos and try to understand what they were doing versus what I was doing, stretching more than people, staying after practice so I can stretch and get in my mobility training, constantly learning if I'm doing those things correctly. And that was a big one for me over time. And so I think that's a beautiful message though, is the reality of, hey, if you realistically want this goal, I always call them pipe dreams. If you want this pipe dream to become an Olympian or win X, Y, and Z, like the workload is unbelievable. And when you really start to see people from the top that aren't as talented, or they are as talented and they put it together with the proper like workload, they're unbelievable. And so I love that messaging, and I don't think it's bad parenting. I think you're a very great father for being like, hey, this is the path. It's going to be hard, but you have to recognize what comes with that. Like I had to give up so many parties, birthdays, weddings. I'm sorry, I can't go. Like I have to train, and it sucks, but there's a reality to it. But just back to the strength part, I just wanted to tap on that because I thought it was a really beautiful part. The strength part for me was interesting because I get into climbing. I start, learning the movement and loving and understanding everything that comes into it. And there's a few pieces that I recognize that like really started, blinking at me, the red lights. It was hamstring strength for heel hooks. I was getting a lot of people getting like, oh dude, I'm getting a pinch, or I feel like I tore my hamstring because I was doing this heel hook and it, boom, gone. Knee pain from drop knees. which I
Yep.
think is what we kind of just spoke about, more so mobility. So you're getting a lot of tension on that patellar tendon and then just the whole knee
Yep.
joint itself.
Hmm.
Finger strength and then shoulder strength. Like those were
Yeah.
the ones that, because obviously people are like pulling tendons in their like hands and all of
Yeah.
that. Hearing the pop, that makes me want to throw up just thinking about that. But so when I look at these pieces, I start to connect to the people that I've seen start doing the strength side. And do you know who Hosok Lee is? Does that sound familiar to you?
Say that again. What's
Hosok
the name?
Lee. He's a I could be butchering his name, so I apologize if somehow
It's
he
okay.
finds this. But he's a South Korean climber, and he got really
Okay.
popular because he posted a video on YouTube about him going from like V0 to V10 in like a year.
Okay.
And
No,
it
I
was
don't
just a
know.
bunch of okay, so it was a bunch of like moonboard climbing, and he showed some of the strength training that he was doing. But the problem that I was having is he's just bouldering. So a lot of the strength training that he's doing, the strength training, which was just kind of like him doing like, hey, let me do 10 sets of 10 pull-ups. You build and he would change how he did the pull-ups, right? So he'd go like close grip, wide grip, fast pull-ups, slow pull-ups, wide, whatever. There's a piece of muscle endurance you're building there. But when it comes to power, I feel like you're missing. And then again, I think there's a beauty in like prehab rehab when it comes to strength training. I'll get to my point. I'm sorry, I'm being long-winded.
No, no.
here,
Take your time. I'm enjoying.
but so I guess the reason why I'm bringing up all these things is I feel like the strength training part could be so beneficial for a lot of athletes, let them be trying to be professional or just non-professional like athletes, climbers that like Gen Pop that are trying to climb consistently without getting hurt. Let that be, tearing a hamstring, finger pulley. I know I'm touching on several different things, but I feel like the big one that I was missing on, because I do want to get to the section at some point of talking about like hangboarding, but more so when it comes to strength training. Have you noticed when that started getting implemented, let it be for some upper body, you're working traps, you're working the lats properly, you're trying to work structural balance, so maybe working a lot more pushing because they're doing so many pulling. Did you see a decrease in injuries, or is it dependent because you could be doing bad strength training, which could not play into your climbing?
So, are you asking are you asking if the amount of strength training we do leads to injuries? Are you asking?
So just by implementing strength training, I don't know, because you said, right, you've been coaching over time now and you've been, gaining so much knowledge. When you started
Yeah.
having your athletes add in strength training, do you actually feel like that decreased injuries that were coming in?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Uh, so so injuries are I feel like an interesting topic. I start my athletes. I had a 7-year-old join the team 2 weeks ago. He's just this cute little guy. He tried out for the team, and I was like, "Yeah, you're great. He's a little fireball." Um, he's like, "This hurts so much, and I don't even care." I was like, "Yes, you're perfect for this team." Um, all my kids are absolute animals, but we strength train constantly. I immediately put him on strength training. We have a great strength and conditioning coach named Denny, who's just very, very good. And so right away, I believe in strength training. Obviously, with the smaller ages comes a lot of precautions and wisdom. If you don't have that, then don't have little kids strength train. But if you do have that knowledge, like I do, it's perfectly okay. And you're going to build really healthy young adults or athletes. With my older kids who are pushing that envelope, they're trying to get to the level of pro climber. They're trying to explore their potential. Whether or not they go pro doesn't matter. They're trying to get the injuries go up with strength training. And at the same time, you don't know how many injuries you're preventing because of strength training. So in that sense, if you had kind of like parallel universes, you could be like, oh, wow, in universe A, you got injured less because you were building such strength around your joints. But in universe B, all you're seeing is these little tweaks and little injuries because of training or because of not getting that balance right, and they're overtraining. often athletes are getting injured because they don't tell me the extra training they're doing. Um, so, you know, there's a lot of people that flip out if an athlete gets injured, like, oh, you're not a good coach, your athletes are getting injured. Um, all I say to that is it's very easy to not get injured if you're sitting on a couch eating potato chips and watching Netflix. I guarantee you're never going to get injured. You're going to die of a heart attack, but you're not going to get injured, and you're going to be very happy that you didn't get injured. My athletes are training very, very hard towards very specific goals. And when they get injured, it's very frustrating and upsetting. And you rehab, and then you just go again, and you go again, and you go again, and they love it, and their parents love it, and they thank me. Being injured is a unfortunate side effect of being a high performance athlete. If it can be, if they're getting injured because of overtraining or maltreatment, there's a lot of that too. There's a lot of coaches that have no idea what they're doing, and their kids are getting injured because of that. I am not, lack of knowledge is not my problem. I push hard, they push hard. We talk constantly about how are you feeling. We have rating systems that they can communicate clearly to me how they're feeling. But they're also hungry and they want to do their best. So sometimes they push a little too hard and they get injured, and then we just have to learn from it and keep going.
Yeah.
It's a reality. But strength training, I don't know. I don't know if I could answer that if I don't have a parallel universe. Does it increase injury? Does it decrease injury? My guess is it probably decreases injury, but it does increase the intensity of what you're doing. And anytime you are dealing with high intensity, you are dealing with injuries, tweaks. It's just how it is right now. I don't know if you saw online, but Indiana's now going through the most horrendous and offensive injury of her climbing career. She fell. No one could have done anything about it. She hit a volume on the way down. It spun her, and she landed on one leg while still spinning, and her knee ended up in a position that I've never seen in sport. When I saw the video, because I wasn't at the gym, I cried when I saw the video. It was actually something I had to deal with for 3 weeks, just having that image in my mind. It was very, very upsetting. It was a career-ending injury, and she's in the middle right now of trying to stay positive and going back to the gym and working, and she's got surgery lined up, and but after the 2 weeks of, man, everything we've worked for just went out the window, you just get back on the horse and you friggin' go again. That's so everyone has to shut up about injuries and just don't talk unless you're a high performance athlete. Because they know what they're doing. They want what they want. You're an Olympian. That's the highest level. People get injured. That's the sport. That's the game.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to, that's kind of the beauty of it, is finding where that threshold is and living there.
It's hard.
You
It's
have to
really
live
hard.
there. Yeah, and it's most likely you will be getting hurt, but it's how quickly can you rebound from that.
Exactly.
My whole career has just been dealing with injuries.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's more so for me, and the reason why I really wanted to bring up strength training is for the people that are listening, especially the ones that are not pro climbing. I think it's so important to have a base to then build upon. Because for diving, for example, there's like a neurological load when you are diving off 10 meter, and I can really assume that because I'm going to get on an off branch here, but like the reason why I was so obsessed with climbing is because there's a fear to diving off 10 meter. Like there's a fear of, like, for my life, and it's because I am afraid of 10 meter and that height, but I was able to connect that and find that in climbing because I seek that fear. I like it. So like when I'm in an overhang and I'm high up and I don't really feel super great making this next move, I feel that fear and I love it. Like, it's great. And so, being able to connect those things are important for me. But my point is, going back to it, is to have a base is so important to build upon. And so I feel like so many people are missing that within their climbing, because I see a lot of, general population climbers that are just getting popped out of the gym constantly that want to be there and that want to put in the work, but they get kicked out because there's not a base of strength that they can build upon, to where when you throw a basic heel hook, like, you shouldn't hear a pop. You shouldn't. And so that's like, it's just a very obvious like marker for me of, hey, you need a lot more strength. But when you get to the other side of it, when you're on the pro level, and I've pushed myself within climbing. I took like this 4-month break. I call it my pseudo retirement. And I climbed for like 4 months. It was the first time I got to do any other sport consistently and put my heart into it. And I understand now, to an extent. I bet you could put me through a hell of a lot more, but I understood like the load it comes from when you push yourself. And so trying to do strength training, which I was doing at the same time on top of that, it's a lot. It's a crazy amount. And so being able to align those two things is so hard. And I think that's why I was asking, because I'm ignorant of the highest of the high. Is it building that strength, that sports specific strength, after, you've had, in strength training, it's like GPP, right? Like after you've had your general preparatory phase of just building volume. And then it's like, hey, like, let's work on strength and power, but like, I don't want to take away from what you're doing, because your sport specific movements, your practice is the most important thing that you should be doing right now. And so you talk about technique being more important than, the strength. And now I'm like really starting to understand, and all of these pieces are kind of forming into, some sort of knowledge. I feel like blending those things would be kind of, the goal, but very interesting kind of learning here.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're talking about really complex issues, so I don't think there's one answer. But let me go back and then actually say, when I am, let's say a new athlete comes on, someone like yourself, a new athlete comes on, the first thing we do is assessments. We do like pretty in-depth assessments, and then I triage what they need. So there might be an athlete that they're getting a lot of climbing volume, but the reason they're stuck is because they're not strong enough. So the priority then becomes really good warm-up, strength training, and then climbing. Athletes that have the opposite problem, they're pretty strong, but they just really need to get on the wall and feel and spend time on the wall. It's warm-up, climbing, and then strength training. So even within my own team of high-performance athletes, I will triage. It'll be like this kid and this kid and this kid is starting on training. This kid and this kid and this kid are starting on climbing. Just to make sure that while they have the most energy at the beginning of the night, even within the week or within the training block, they are focusing on the thing that they need the most. So there is this mix of technique and strength, but it depends on the person. Both are equally important. If you're not strong, like you said, if you don't have a base, you are going to plateau no matter what. Technique cannot get you up. The steeper the wall and the smaller the holds, technique's just not going to work. It's not going to work if it's not partnered with absurd strength. And when you're a recreational climber, I'd say the biggest thing missing is strength and technique equally. But for them, it's mostly you need to be hitting these exercises to build up that base. And what were the ones that you named again? I there was hamstring, shoulders. What else?
Yeah,
did
I
you
was
name?
saying hamstring, shoulders. I brought up the mobility of the hips for like
Yeah,
drop
yeah,
knees and having that
yeah,
tension. And then,
yeah,
like upper back, and then having some sort of structural balance within push and pull,
yeah,
which could be like working opposing muscle groups there.
yeah. So the only thing I was going to add to that list is core. For
Okay.
climbing, it's that's usually the first thing I'll put people on is, oh wow, you can do your 10 pull-ups, great. You can do your 10 push-ups, great. Now try this sport-specific, drill-specific core exercise. And they're like, why can't I do one of these? Okay, well, you have a weak core. Contrary to your abs, contrary to your belief, in this sport, core is, I'd say in any sport, core is fundamental, but
Yeah.
in climbing, it's as important as in gymnastics. I mean,
Yeah.
core is your center block within, upon which everything else is built.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I noticed that diving is literally core, like a lot, like
Literally core.
yeah, it's core. It's how explosive can you compress into a position, but with that comes a lot of similar training that you'd find within climbing. My assumption, because
Absolutely.
when I got into positions that most people were struggling in, I'm kind of like laughing because I have all of that base already.
Yeah. Piking.
Question,
Pike, pike, pike,
piking.
pike, pike.
Yeah, yeah. So I feel like there's a huge obsession with front levers. Is it as important as people really think it is? Does it really kind
No,
of fit in?
that's the same. No, that's the same as the one arm pull up. It's
Okay.
useless, but it's great for
Interesting.
Instagram, and it's a good
Ah,
marker. It's a good marker for the calisthenic. So if you said to me, you can never lift weights again and only do calisthenics, and that's like for my team, I can only train my team in calisthenics, or I can only train them in weights and no calisthenics. I would choose calisthenics every time, because so there's two types of strength that I've identified. One, physical strength. One is strong muscles. Strong muscles gets you only so far. You go to the gym, some guy's bench pressing 500 pounds. Damn, that's a strong. He's got strong pecs. He's got strong triceps. He's got strong quads. He's pushing into the floor. He's got strong big muscles. Climbing, as well as other sports, are about strong joints. This is different. Strong joints are a whole other thing. When a guy comes in, he's like, "How did your little 12-year-old girl just do that boulder?" And I can't, and I bench press like 10 of her. She's got stronger joints than you. Um, Strong knees, strong elbows, strong wrists, strong shoulders. When you build those stabilization muscles, it's a different thing. I arm wrestled competitively for a time. I'm a small guy. I'm only 5'7", 150 pounds. People don't understand how I'm so small and old, and just demolish people in arm wrestles, and they're big muscular guys. My wrists are way stronger than yours because I train wrist strength. My elbows are way stronger than yours because I train elbow joints. It's all those stabilization muscles that make a huge difference. When I put that to work, when I put my athletes to work in the same way, the comment I always get after every comp is it's from a parent or coach or another athlete that are like, "What the hell is with your athletes? They're so friggin' strong." They don't have huge muscles. We're just training joints. We're training strong connective joints. That's a different level of strength.
yeah, yeah.
And you're
It
never too
does.
young to start that. You're never too young to
Yeah,
start that.
yeah. It does crack me up because I initially I was seeing so many front levers and how to get your front lever and working towards a one arm pull up, and I can understand the utility in being able to pull body weight up on one arm unilaterally. But as a piece of every, I feel like maybe you might lean into this. You'd much rather start to lean into the core work and the mobility work and then work your technique more so than trying to cram and really train this one arm pull up. Are you guys still doing like weighted pull ups and stuff like that?
So one of the things that, and don't get me wrong, by the way. So when I was talking about joints, I actually am talking about calisthenics works joints better than weightlifting. That's the
Yeah.
point of calisthenics. Calisthenics is working that those joints are just so much stronger in calisthenics. So that's why I would take it. And front levers and pull-ups, they're all calisthenic exercises. So
Yeah.
the overall, holistically, it's better for training. It's better for climbing than
Yeah.
weights are. Um, do front levers apply directly to climbing? Not really, but they're great for Instagram, and they're also a great confidence boost. And if you want to
Yeah.
talk, as you know, as an Olympian, is confidence part of performance? Of course, an enormous part. If you don't believe you can do it, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So if a one arm pull up or a perfect front lever helps you with confidence, dude, let's train them night and day. I don't care what it is. We need to get your confidence up. So I use them for that. I use them for Instagram. It's great, but it also boosts. Hey, holy cow, I just hit a goal. I hit a major goal. So is it climbing relevant movement? But is it performance climbing relevant? Oh my gosh. Huge, huge. Um, so yeah, that's what I would say about calisthenics
Okay.
and just like hitting those markers. I think it's important.
Yeah.
As long as yeah, anyway, I could go on, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so then you look at, and this is something I feel like a lot of athletes have to understand is you you break down the muscle in the weight room, right?
Hmm.
But you build it once you get back home. Like that's where the building actually happens. That's where the muscle starts to build. And
Yeah.
so I've heard some better climbers. I heard this from Magnus way back when in one of his videos, because again, I like to watch what he does, and I try to touch
Hmm.
everywhere. Um, he says he only climbs twice a week. And so the reason
Hmm.
why I brought up the strength training part is essentially like you go climb, you're just breaking down your muscles, and especially like the fingers, and you're like, especially for me, like my fingers are throbbing by the end of a session. Um,
Yes.
what is that? And maybe that's just because I don't have the volume behind me.
Hmm.
But what does that usually look like? Are you having 2 hard days? So like, for example, I dive 10 meter 3 to 4 times a week.
Wow.
And that's the top for me. Like 4 times a week, I'm like, all right, like I can't do more. I can't do more or I'm
Hmm.
going to break. And so,
Yeah.
what does that look like for you for like hard climbing sessions? Is that twice a week?
Okay, so this is one of my passions, and this upsets people because I don't have an answer for this. I get DMs constantly. What's the ideal? What's the ideal? What's the ideal? Unfortunately, um, I'm not a big fan of training plans in the traditional
Yeah.
sense because they don't work. People get tweaked, get tired, get overwhelmed with work, have emotional breakdowns because it's been no sun for 2 months. Like, training plans do not fit with the human species. They fit with computer programming. They fit with, do you understand? Like,
Yes.
humans are organic, delicate, communicative, changing organisms. Coaching and programming has to be the exact same. So I have a goal in mind. I want to hit for this training block 3 hard training sessions per week. But when 85% of my athletes come to training dead, and one of them's overwhelmed with homework, and the other one is slightly sick, and the other one is, then okay, it's play day, right? It's spending time laughing together, playing fun games, making up challenges, building team, building morale, you know, having a safe place for them to go. Humans need that sometimes more than they need training. So I don't have an answer. I've never had an answer. I'll never have an answer. My goal is ideally 3 hard training sessions per week. On top of that, you should have 1 to 2 climbing sessions that are a little bit more relaxed, meaning that you're going at 50% of your max, 60%, 70% of your max. So that could be endurance training. It could be all sorts of things. It could be climbing outdoors for fun. But some days I only get 1 hard day in a week. Some days I get 2 hard days in. Some days I get 4 hard days in, depending on the athlete, depending on the team morale. But my number one skill as a coach is paying very close attention to my athletes as humans, not as athletes, so that I can be a more effective at responding to them and pushing them within the particular space they're in. This is
Yeah.
this is the art of coaching for me. This is the art of teaching for me, is connecting with people where they are at, not where you want them to be. This is the difference. And so I have ideals, but how often are those ideals met? 10%, 20% of the time.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm making adjustments on the fly to do the best I can with their full development: physical, mental, spiritual, psychological, health. All of that has to be developed equally. You can't just say, get stronger, do more climbing. You are developing people. And my athletes are very, very, very high performing precisely because of that, because they are healthy, happy people that have been well taken care of.
Yeah. I think that's probably the best answer you could give. Um,
Okay, good.
and yeah, no, honestly though, because there has to be gray area, and I think that's maybe more so where I was looking at, because I feel like people kind of want to maybe generalize, but just find a
All the
structure
time.
that they can, yeah, and they want to connect to something. Well, hey, these people are incredible because they train 3 times a week on the kilter board and now they're nuts. And it's like, I wish that was the case, because then we could all just follow that blueprint. But like, that's not how things go. And it's like the same thing in diving. It's like, you can look at the Russians or the Chinese and all these incredible divers, and it's like, they do things unbelievably different than one another. Like, there isn't like, the Chinese will break 15,000 divers, but one of them will come out an Olympic champion, and there's no way you're going to beat that person. But you know, you come to other places to where we actually, you know, like, care about each individual, and it changes, and you do have to lean into like, how do you feel today? Are you like, did you get broken up with? Let's not climb today. Let's make sure your mental health is actually like, you know, thriving. And so I think that was probably the best answer you could give, was, you know, leaning into the individual and what they need.
It's interesting because I get feedback just kind of through the avenues, through whatever feedback, or I ask people, you know, what's my reputation out there, and it's the prevailing reputation is that I'm too hard on my athletes. But if you ask the parents, the athletes, it's the exact opposite. We are about human development. We are about caring for one another. Do we outwork everybody? Oh yeah. I'm very proud of that. Our climate that I work very hard to create, our culture, as many visiting coaches and athletes have said, the culture is different. The culture is not Canadian. It's more Russian. It's more China. It's more like these militant, you know, like, oh, you're bleeding? Okay, tape up and get to work. What are you talking about? Like we're there to push, and we're pushing to explore the potential of the human spirit, and it's fun. It's fun getting scraped up and banged up and pushing and pushing and pushing. And I've got athletes throwing up out the back. They love it. We're there to we're having so much fun enduring pain and suffering. It's a fantastic condition that we should be not avoiding. We should be celebrating that we get to suffer. It's fantastic. And we can do it safely, and we can do it together, and it can be we recognize it as an opportunity to grow and to not be soft. There's times to be soft and gentle, and there's times when it's, hey, let's see how tough and strong and how much we can endure. It's fantastic. And it's a culture that's very hard to explain without getting immediately judged. But if you ask the athletes, yeah, we push pretty hard. But that is just a subcategory to the general ethos that I hope to cultivate, which is love and belonging and caring. Out of that, because they feel safe, they're like, okay, let's go. Let's see. Yeah. Let's do it again, you know?
Yeah. I feel like ignorance seeks an easy answer. So if someone...
That's a great line. That's a great line.
Like, someone looking in sees something very intense, but when you get inside the core, and the core is what you literally just explained, if someone feels comfortable enough to push the limit, I mean, you just kind of remind, like, people go to CrossFit. You could look at CrossFit as being like masochistic, because they're throwing up, but they're smiling, like they're happy. That's what they like to do.
That's the main criticism of CrossFit. I'm a huge fan of CrossFit. It does injure a lot of athletes because it has this culture of like push.
Yeah.
But if you want to quit.
Yeah.
Like, no one's making you do this. Stop complaining. These are first world problems. Oh, you got injured doing the sport you love? Like, people are like, oh, poor Indiana. I'm like, what are you talking about? She fell in a sport where she knows she falls 99% of the, well, you fall 100% of the time. 99.9% of the time you're fine. But there is risk. And she's doing the sport she loves. She doesn't go to school. She does. She's online. But she has only first world problems. So don't give me this poor, I hurt a finger. Get over yourself. Like, you chose it. Get better. Stay positive. Let's get back to work. Or quit. You always have that. Just walk away. Go back to knitting. And I love to knit, by the way. But, like, if you want to pick something where you don't get injured, you know, it's not climbing. Don't take up climbing, folks, if you're listening, if you're afraid of getting injured.
I love it. Well, so I do want to touch on this piece. Diving, again, I connect so much to climbing. And so while
Mm-hmm.
I'm on 10 meter, there is I recognize the deeper I get into climbing. And so once you get to the Olympic level, I used to say diving was 70-30. It was 70% physical, 30% mental. And
Ah,
then I
one
got
of
a
my
little
favorite
bit deep.
topics.
Yes, I got a little bit deeper and I was like 80-20. Keep getting deeper.
So
95.
what's the ratio then? So what's
I
95-5?
I used to say 95-5, and now I've gotten so deep, like genuinely, in my opinion, it's 100%. It's 100%
Correct.
mental. It cannot be
Correct.
anything else other than 100% mental.
Yeah, Conor McGregor said it. Conor McGregor, it's a famous quote from Conor. He said it's 100% mental. And it was based on that exact conversation. What is it? Is it 50% physical, 50%? No, not just this game. Any game is 100% mental. Life is 100% mental. It's how we process and program. It's how we process everything. It's how we program our emotions and our feelings. And it's mental.
Yeah, it's funny though, because so my the first podcast I posted was with my friend Luis, who climbs. So my
I
first
listened to it.
video, yes, let's go. I said my big piece was the body follows the mind, and I was obsessed with
Yeah.
that piece because, he has this disability, something that holds him back, but because he is so mentally strong. It's almost a positive. It's rocket fuel pushing him forward. And it was so inspiring for me to follow suit and watch him do anything. I get very excited. And so again, you go into climbing and I was, leaning in, I get into scary positions and I'm like, for diving, right? If my mind doesn't lock into the cues and corrections that I need to do, the body will not do it. It won't just, sure, I got you. And so, do you find that once you get on such a, high performing stage? Again, I always bring up slab because it petrifies me. But I mean, talk about fear. I feel fear on like even a V2. I'm like, God, please don't don't slip. What does that look like? What does that mental training look like for you?
Okay, so you're now talking about my favorite thing in the whole world.
Yes.
I'm a philosopher and psychologist first, so and education and pedagogy fall into that. I am a student of what it is to be human, and what it is to be human is psychological and philosophical as much as it is biological. So for me, I think one of the things, and I do have coaches and athletes that fly in from all over the world to watch a training session and or participate or join, and they just want to see what we do in person because it's easier than trying to get a sense through Instagram. And what they end up seeing the most of is not that we do more pull-ups. Actually, we don't do that many pull-ups, but they see me pushing the kids athlete mentally. Often I'm trying to break them in a session just to watch them break because I want to see how they react. You will not see my athletes fall apart very often at comps, big comps. Shout out to Kayla. I won't say her last name, but one of my OG, she's been with me forever, high performance athletes, a brilliant climber, a legend. And she, last year or 2 years ago, I don't remember, went to finals in lead climbing. Her foot slips off the first hold, and instead of crumbling in a puddle of tears, she turns to the audience and bows. And I got more compliments for that than I did the two national champions we had that year, or whatever. It's like, how are your athletes so resilient? And that's the word. I'm interested in resiliency. So I often, I'd say about once a practice, maybe once every other practice, we'll have at least one athlete who's crying but still training. And I'll go up and I'll say, hey, are you okay? Like, do you want to stop? And they'll be like, no, it's just so hard, right? Like what they're doing is so hard and they're so tired and they're crying. And my question is, do you want to stop? I want you to stop if you want to stop, but they don't want to stop because we do so much resiliency training. They just want to get it done because they know they will be more proud of themselves if they do. That for me is everything. Like weak mind, I can't work with. Weak body, sure.
Yeah.
Let's get you strong. That's fun. I like seeing the progress. If you have like a mind that's you're coachable, and when people say, "What do you mean by when I'm asking if you're coachable?" What I mean is the mind? Are you able to take feedback, criticism, and apply it?
Yeah.
Do you want to learn? Do you want to get better? This is all mind stuff. So in training, to answer your question, I don't know if I've answered your question yet, but in training, I'm mostly putting them on, again, what visiting athletes have called a playground of failure. I'm setting literally climbs that don't go. Sometimes I don't even put a finish hold on, which really upsets visiting athletes, because I just want to see you fall constantly over and over and over again. And it doesn't matter if the move goes. People always ask me that, like, why did you set a move that like only an IFSC pro would send and a 10-year-old boy wouldn't? I just want to see him try, because each time he tries, he's building synapses in his brain, he's problem solving, he's filling gaps a little bit at a time. That's learning. Getting the move and feeling good about yourself is not learning. Learning is improving a little bit each time and building resiliency each time. And when they shake their head and they come down and they hang their head or they say something to themselves, I call them on it every time. This is not acceptable. Give up if you want to quit. But if you want this, then look for the good, look for what you did better, ask for feedback, work together, work with your teammates, and continue on. This is resiliency, and it's all in the mind.
Yeah, I love that, because then, like, in diving, right? So I've had this conversation with my sports psychologist, who we had on also, and we kind of talked about a lot of the things that I've dealt with within my career and how we built off of that. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I've been able to utilize a lot of, I call it like tactical journaling. That's a big one for me. I kind of saw that within Alex Honnold was within his documentary, was kind of writing down and talking about moves. And then, again, you go back to the concept. It's like your mind is a muscle too. So it has to be worked on. Like, you cannot just leave these things on the wayside, because that little mind, it's the little chirp that tells you, oh, you're afraid, don't do this, don't try this, lean into that fear and give into it. And so, we always have that on 10 meter. I'm sitting in a handstand and my mind's like, you have no idea what you're doing. You don't know how to twist off your hands. Stop. And you start falling, and then it's getting louder and louder, and then you have to go. And so being able to work with these things, utilizing a sports psychologist, tactical journaling, and now I'm kind of learning it sounds like you use unbeatable problems to force the mind to be able to think in hard situations and be able to problem solve enough to where they get into a winnable situation, right? So if they're at a, pro competition, there is an end hold. And so I'm just trying to like work it through my mind. You use, unwinnable problems, which I'm kind of obsessed with. I really like that. And then are there any other little like tidbits that you kind of throw in there outside of, coaching them on the spot mentally?
So my athletes know I don't hide my philosophy. They know what it is, so that they know what I'm doing. So they know that our main approach is law of exposure. If I expose you 12 hours a week to constant failure, constant grind, constant suffering, a competition where other athletes are feeling stress, difficulty, what if, my athletes are chill. The training's way harder than comps. I'm crushing them in training. A comp is a dream, right? They're topping things, they're flashing things, because it's a dream compared to what training is. I'm trying to abuse them. Like, I'm trying to push them to their very edge. So comps are just like, my gosh, I flashed 4 boulders. This is easy, right? Yeah. But also the other side of that is if they don't complete, like Kayla, if she falls off the first hold, she's so used to failure. It's not the end of the world. It's just part of doing this at the highest level. You're just going to fail most of the time. You hope that you don't fail in competition. You hope that it pays off, that the long gamble is that you have your day, right? The more comps you do, the more days you'll have. If you only do 1 comp a year, you're gambling. Maybe you have a good day, maybe you don't. But if you do 10 comps in a row, the way we're training, 7 of those are going to be amazing days, and you're going to have the anomalistic days where you just don't perform. That's what I would say about that. The little voice, by the way, that you said, is one of my favorite voices in the world, even though it's a horrible, horrible voice. because I figured out what it is. And once I figured out what it is, I was very freed from it. And I'll tell you what it is from my perspective. That little voice in your head is always bluffing. The little voice in your head is never real. It's always bluffing you. And if to overcome it, you call the bluff. So I'll give you an example. What's our biggest fear, generally speaking? One of our biggest fears is failure, right? What if I don't do well? So what I do to flip the switch on that little voice is I call the bluff. Let's celebrate failure, not fear it. Let's get so good at celebrating failure that we recognize the value of failure. The value of failure is every time you fail, you learn something. If you're active, and if you're intentional, you learn something, you apply it, you improve. Let's go fail again and do that again. Fail, recognize, identify what I told you what I did with Indiana when she was little. Why did you fall? Let's address it. Let's move forward. Okay, good. That becomes so addictive. Let's fail. Let's go again. Let's fail. Let's fail. Let's fail. Let's fail. My athletes know that. They know that it's not only okay to fail, it's the goal. And when I say this, people are like, what are you talking about? The goal is failure? My answer is not shy. Yes, 100% the goal is failure. For 90% of the time, the goal is failure. Because what we're training for is the 10%. We're training for the 10% of the time when we are so conditioned that failure is okay and celebrated, that if it happens at a comp, all right. But most likely, they're not going to fail because they're not afraid of it. Why do most people fail at comps? Because they're afraid to fail. Yeah. And it leads to their failure. This is the wrong way. Coaches, listen to me. This is the wrong way. You have to celebrate failure until it's so normal and so okay and so celebrated that they don't fear it. And once you don't fear it, you can perform. Call the bluff on that little voice. That little voice knows nothing. It's always just bluffing you.
I love that. I want to, so we can end it there if you do not have more time, but if you do have more time, I have like two little tiny questions.
I'm not doing it. I'm not doing anything.
Okay.
For once. I'm doing a podcast with you. So.
Yes. So, okay, then it walks me back to more simplicity, and we'll take it out of this deep little section that we have, even though I'm obsessed with it. We can keep going for 17 more hours. But what are your thoughts, goals, and philosophies when it comes to training boards and hang boards? And we can kind of more so start with like a hang board. Do you implement it for training for athletes? What does that look like? Is it as important as I think it is, or what do you think?
So there's mixed. I'm probably going to have to preface this because people get pretty upset about the subject because it leads to injury so much. So I'll just tell you my approach to it. For my younger kids, they're almost, I don't even have to say almost, they're never hangboarding. Strong fingers is built through climbing. Specifically, by the way, if you want to build strong fingers, board climb. Kilter board, moon board, tension board. Board climb. It is steep. Steep climbing by default puts pressure on your fingers. A lot of the holds are half crimp type of like semi-good crimps and kind of mini jugs, but in the crimp position. The best way to build strength is through board climbing. My athletes that are trying to go pro or national level athletes, if I recognize that their fingers are not strong enough, then and only then do we use the fingerboard to fill those gaps. Endurance hangs, max level hangs, weighted hangs, things like that. But I'm very careful with those. And I'm also not a huge fan of anything where your hands are side by side. So hangs, pull-ups, that kind of thing. Almost everything that we do in training is staggered or offset or isolated. So offset hangs, offset pull-ups, offset. This is more relevant to climbing because we're never like this. We're always offset or wide. So we should be training the same way. So I will usually do offset hangs, one arm hangs, modified hangs with bands or weights to offset the weight. I only use them to fill gaps. Generally speaking, strong fingers comes from climbing, which does raise the point if I'm training fingers specifically. And the answer is yes. There will be days when I am on the spray wall. We have a world-class spray wall. It's quite something. The holes are insanely hard. But I will only make boulders for, let's say I have a group of some of my top athletes. For an hour and a half, 2 hours, they'll just be doing boulders on very, very, very difficult crimps and small holds. In that way, they are doing many, many reps of finger training, but in the atmosphere of climbing, through the method of climbing. Now people will say, well, that's not great because you're not building data, and the only way to build data scientifically is through, journaled, documented, app using, hangs, finger lifts, things like that. I agree with all that. There's a time and a place for all that. I have athletes that do that. But generally speaking, I build finger strength through climbing.
Got it. Yeah, because then it's been so interesting for me to either want to implement that training and try to understand the hangboard and all like when and where. And it's funny because you go online and it is so it's dogmatic. It's very like you either, and it's either side of the aisle. It's like you either do
That's
it
right.
or you don't do it. And it's just so aggressive on either side. And so trying to find that the logic, I always say this, like logic is found in the middle. And so wherever we can find that is probably going to be the most beneficial. But I guess that makes the most sense to me. Especially it's like, you could train all of these things, but if I'm just strong here, I don't know how much utility there is to that. Would you implement hangboard if someone's like, hey, I can't go to the gym as much as I would want to? Would you be like, hey, here's a hangboard session so you can consistently like keep touching that?
Yeah, some of my remote athletes in the past just will be so remote. They'll be in countries or towns where they just don't have climbing gyms. They'll only climb on hangboards. And for them, I have very elaborate training systems that are, again, to go back to my earlier point, highly individualized. It's an amazing tool. And I also use hangboards way more for people that are injured or overcoming a tweak or just have tired fingers. So if you have tired fingers, I'm not going to put you on V10s on the spray wall. You're going to get injured. Let's do isometric hangs with our feet on the floor, right? So the hangboard is such an important tool. Yeah. But it's a tool. It's not the Bible. It's a tool that you can utilize for certain things at certain times, conditionally speaking. It's like if you're trying to build a house, the hammer is really, really important, but it's not the most important, right? The hangboard is really important. It's not the most important. Yeah. And it has its function. Yeah. It has functions that it does really well.
Yeah. So then if you were to look at, then take out the hangboard and now we're utilizing, the training walls, is there a specific one that you lean on more, more generally for people to start to work on strength and understanding, good movement patterns? And I feel like maybe the kilter board, since I've done that the most, feels very dynamic. Do you utilize the tension board, moon board, or kilter board more specifically than any other one? And, what does that look like?
So you mean what does finger training on the... Yeah, I lost you for a second. So what does training on the wall look like? Finger training?
Yeah, so would you... the reason why I like the tension board is, you can work both sides. You can do the same problem left and right.
Yeah. Right?
And so I could see the utility in using that. But when it comes to the kilter board, it feels maybe a little bit more dynamic. And then I haven't really touched the moon board because, I've heard too many horror stories. And again, I don't climb that frequently. So I feel like it's almost a little too aggressive for me at this point. But, what does that look like? Am I kind of tapping on it properly there? When do you use these boards?
So the great thing about a lot of the boards, maybe with the exception of the Moon board, which is quite aggressive, is there's V3s. There's a lot of boards are adjustable, so you can you can apply common sense and just slowly progress on them. Um, and I think that's the number one. It's the obvious answer that is just the answer. You progress slowly. So you go on less steep and you climb until your fingers are tired. I mean, that's really, people don't like that answer either, is I'll say listen to your body. Um, but that's a great way. The more you listen to your body, the better you get at it. We have a vocabulary for how to do that. So if you have a good coach, they can assign vocabulary so that you actually start assigning numbers and percentages to things like fatigue, muscle soreness, things like that. Once you have a vocabulary and you're practiced in listening to your body, you can use that as a very effective guide. Um, so the science and the data, although extremely important and builds world class strength, listening to your body and having a system for that is, I would easily say, just as valid. Um, so I will, if so I might have an athlete who is not that strong with just like physical pulling and finger strength. My go-to is board climbing. You are now board climbing. You're board climbing for 6 weeks. At the end of that 6 weeks, I've collected no data, and they're 50% stronger. So this comes back to this concept of law of exposure. Board climbing once a week is not enough. We need to say if this is an area that we want to focus on, then you can decrease the level through V grade and through angle of the board, but spend time on it. You spend time diving from 10 meters, it becomes a lot more familiar, a lot more easy. The language is there. Um, you don't spend time, then it's terrifying and overwhelming, and most likely you'll get hurt. Well, it's the same with board climbing. If you don't spend time on it and you don't progress on it, but consistently stay on it and spend time on it, then yeah, you increase your chances of getting hurt and you don't progress. So board climbing is again per athlete, but some of them I'll just say you're on this. You're on the board again today and again today and again today. Yeah.
Um, okay, I like that. And it's a good answer because then it kind of eases people into understanding, when and why to use that. If you do feel weak or you need to kind of build up these specific little muscles in a different way, that would be a great touch.
Yeah, people usually say like people that are new to climbing very quickly understand wall angles and they'll say, "Okay, I'm good at slab, I'm not good at slab. I get killed on steep wall or I'm okay on steep wall." Um, and then if you just help them a little bit and say, "Okay, but what's giving out on steep wall?" "Oh, well, my fingers, my arms just can't hold on, body tension, core, things like that." "Okay, great. Kilter board, tension board.
Yeah.
Put it on 30 degrees, 20 degrees, and just go to work."
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I
Yeah,
do. This is the last thing I want to touch upon, and I'm
sure.
excited that we were able to hit all of these points, and I'm interested to see your answer on this, and I'll
Okay.
obviously give us a preface to this, but just based off of what I've noticed in diving, uh,
Hmm.
watching myself, not just experiencing, but watching, there's an intellect. I'm interested to see what you have to say here, but there's an intellect to diving. Like, oh, this person's just like really smart. They have a really bad takeoff, but they're smart enough to adjust quickly. Because again, you're in the air for such a minute amount of time. Making a split decision is very, very hard, but there's an intellect to it. Hey, within these 2.5, 3 seconds, I noticed that I had a really bad start and I have to make a micro adjustment to where I'm going to kick. Instead of kicking at 3 o'clock, I'm going to push it back up to 2 and make sure I'm extra tight. And I'm actually going to slow myself down by kicking my arms out and slowing down my momentum. And so there's all
Yeah.
these little smart things, intellectual things that you can do quickly. Wow, that was really smart that this person did that because of these little
Hmm.
pieces. Do you
Hmm.
notice that within climbing? Hey, this person got really stuck in this weird move. You can obviously tell they're fatigued and tired, and maybe you see this more in lead climbing, but they're fatigued, they're tired, but they made this really smart move, and they think really intellectually on the wall while they're in a hard situation. Do you start to see that within climbing a lot?
Many years ago, I put together a term that I was trying to put together to describe this phenomena that wasn't quite intelligence, but it wasn't quite anything. And I called it physical genius. And I had this term and I was kicking it around. What is physical genius? What is it to be intelligent but in your body? Good instincts, but what does that mean? And what I have finally arrived at is that it's this mind-body connection where you are practicing making split decisions physically. It's not premeditated. Those divers aren't premeditated. They're making adjustments on the fly. This is physical genius. This is the ability to make those adjustments because you trust your intuition. You trust the connection between your body and your brain. Your brain's sending the electrical signals, but your body's reacting. Like you said, when people say, "Oh, the mind is a muscle," the mind is a muscle, but the mind-body connection is a muscle. That connecting those things is really, really important. So I will have my athletes doing things that often when people are looking in, they're like, well, why do 100% of your athletes have to do jump rope to warm up? Why not assault bike? Why not the rower? Because the assault bike and rower are mindless. Jump rope is mind-body connection. And not just jumping, doing tricks, having goals. I do not like junk training. Junk training is warming up, but it's mindless. If you're warming up 20 minutes a day, what is that over a year? How many hours is that over a year that you wasted doing nothing? Jump rope is an amazing example because you're constantly learning new tricks, making new connections, building new synapses. Juggling. You have your athletes juggle? Yes, of course. Juggling. Anything where Rubik's Cube, mind-body connections, just building that ability to make your brain tell your body to do something, and ideally quickly. So if you're going to learn Rubik's Cube, learn it, but then start racing it. If you're going to do jump rope, learn it, but then do tricks. If you're going to do juggling, learn it, but then do tricks. That's so important. Build the connection so that it's there. Build the intuition so that it's there. And it's something I wrote about in my blog, an article called Ecological Dynamics. And that is essentially that. It's empowering athletes to trust their problem-solving ability on the fly and making adjustments in real time so that they are self-organizing and solving within that 5-minute period on the clock. Too many coaches are telling their athletes what to do, giving them the beta, cultivating skills, which is important but also dangerous. Because if you cultivate a skill doing it always the same way, then if the problem isn't precisely that solution, if the problem in front of them is slightly different, they'll only be able to execute the skill the way they learned. They won't be able to make adjustments on the fly. So more important than a specific skill is the skill of making adjustments on the fly, physical genius, ecological dynamics, learning how to adjust to the problem in front of them. This is highest level of coaching in terms of what it is to be a coach. Well, get an athlete to perform. An athlete performs best if they trust their ability to make micro adjustments, and then everyone else watching says exactly what you said. Holy crap, that was smart.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, so you brought up the blog. Where can we find you, and where do we get your information outside of the fantastic Instagram that I found you on?
Yeah. CoachMattChapman.com. It's a subscription-based blog that I'm pouring more time into this year. It's a way for me to you can sign up for free and get access to some posts, many posts, but I'm uploading really content that, as you said, I give away a lot for free on Instagram, but that's really a bit more for the masses. If you want more in depth, a look at what it is to train and compete and perform and also develop as an athlete and as a person. I have much more in-depth stuff on my blog. You can subscribe for free or for $10 a month. And the only reason I charge, because I've never been good at doing that. I prefer to just give things away for free. But the reason I charge is it allows me to explain to my wife why I'm putting in so many hours. So if I can pay a bit of the bills, then I have the right to invest a lot of time to help people become better climbers.
Beautiful. Well, it's been an absolute honor having you on the podcast, and I feel like I'm going to have to bring you back on at some point just to rehash out some new things, and it's been super great. So yeah, thank you for popping on, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right. Peace.
Peace.